In the summer of 2018, archaeologists excavating near the Texas-Mexico border discovered a burial site that would shatter Hollywood's version of cowboy history. The grave contained a man buried alongside his horse, a vaquero, the original Spanish-Mexican cattleman who invented every technique American cowboys would later claim as their own. His leather gear showed craftsmanship beyond anything in Western films. His customized revolver bore Arabic script. His DNA would reveal he descended from North African Moors who'd settled in Spain, then crossed the Atlantic centuries before the American West became legendary. This wasn't the white frontier hero of cinema, but a dark-skinned horseman whose people had been herding cattle on horseback since medieval times. The burial goods included a lasso, braided from horsehair, silver spurs that jingled with every step, and a knife inscribed with the name Joaquín and the date 1848, the year the Mexican-American War ended, and thousands of skilled vaqueros suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of a new border. DNA testing revealed even more. This vaquero also carried Native American ancestry, making him a perfect symbol of the multicultural reality that history books erased in favor of simpler, whiter myths about how the West was won. The South Texas borderlands in 2018 looked vastly different from the landscape of 1848, yet the land retained memories. Where once endless grasslands supported millions of wild cattle and the vaqueros who herded them, now highways, border fences, and scattered ranches divided territory that neither recognized nor respected the cultural boundaries of the past. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, a historical archaeologist from the University of Texas, was leading a survey ahead of planned highway expansion when ground-penetrating radar revealed an anomaly approximately 3 miles from the Rio Grande. The signature suggested a burial, specifically the distinctive pattern of human remains alongside a large animal, possibly a horse. Horse burials in this region could indicate several possibilities. Native American groups occasionally buried important individuals with horses. Spanish colonial period burials sometimes included horses for high-status persons. Or this could be a vaquero, the skilled horseman who'd dominated cattle ranching in this region before American settlers arrived. Excavation began in July 2018, with a small team working carefully through layers of sandy soil. At approximately 4 feet depth, they encountered the first bones, equine remains, arranged in natural position, as if the horse had been laid carefully, rather than thrown carelessly. The skeleton was complete, suggesting deliberate burial rather than natural death and scavenging. Adjacent to the horse, human remains emerged. The individual had been buried in seated position, an unusual choice suggesting cultural beliefs about death, or perhaps practical considerations about grave construction. The body faced west, toward the sunset, a symbolism common in multiple cultural traditions, associating death with the sun's daily journey. What immediately struck Dr. Gonzalez was the preservation of organic materials. The dry borderland climate had desiccated rather than decomposed leather, textile, and other normally perishable items. The deceased wore what appeared to be a complete vaquero outfit: leather chaps, a vest, boots with distinctive spurs still attached, and the remains of what had been a wide-brimmed sombrero. But these weren't the Hollywood cowboy costumes. The leather showed intricate tooling, geometric and floral patterns stamped into the surface with considerable skill. The spurs were silver, not steel, with rowels shaped like 8-pointed stars that would have created distinctive jingling sounds with every step. The craftsmanship exceeded anything mass-produced, suggesting custom work by master artisans. Near the skeleton's right hand lay a revolver, specifically a Colt Patterson model dating to the 1840s. But this weapon had been extensively modified. The grip showed careful carving, creating better ergonomics. Most remarkably, silver wire had been inlaid into the metal, creating patterns that closer examination revealed as Arabic calligraphy, words from the Quran invoking divine protection. A knife in a leather sheath bore an inscription, Joaquín, 1848. The date was significant. The year the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican-American War and transferred vast territories from Mexico to the United States. For Vaqueros living in what became Texas, this meant they'd suddenly become foreigners in lands their families had worked for generations. The lasso coiled near the body demonstrated exceptional rope-working skill. Unlike the hemp or sisal ropes common in American ranching, this lasso was braided from horsehair. Hundreds of individual hairs twisted and braided together to create a rope both strong and flexible. Creating such rope required patience, skill, and intimate knowledge of materials. Most poignant was a leather pouch containing personal items, a small silver cross, several coins including Spanish colonial reales and early American dollars, and what appeared to be a miniature painting on copper showing a woman's face, perhaps a wife, sister, or daughter. These intimate possessions transformed the burial from archaeological specimen to human story. The horse itself told stories. Analysis of the skeleton revealed a gelding approximately 15 hands tall, smaller than modern horses, but perfectly sized for the agile, quick movements cattle work required. Wear patterns on teeth indicated the horse had been fed both grass and grain, suggesting its owner had resources to supplement natural forage. The bones showed no signs of disease or injury, implying the horse had been healthy when buried, probably killed specifically for burial with its master. Dr. Gonzalez's forensic analysis of the skeleton revealed both the individual's lifestyle and the probable cause of his death, painting a picture of a man whose body bore the marks of his profession in ways that would surprise anyone whose image of cowboys came from Hollywood films. The skeleton belonged to a male approximately 35 to 45 years old at death, middle-aged by 19th century standards when life expectancy was considerably shorter than today. His height was estimated at 5 feet 7 inches, average for the period and actually on the taller side for someone of Spanish-Mexican descent, though shorter than the tall, lanky cowboys of cinema. But the bone structure revealed exceptional upper body development. The shoulder joints, arm bones, and hand bones showed pronounced muscle attachment points, indicating extraordinary strength in arms, shoulders, and hands. This matched what Vaquero life demanded: constant pulling on heavy lassos, controlling powerful horses, and wrestling with cattle. The right arm showed asymmetric development, being noticeably more robust than the left, suggesting he was right-handed and used that arm more intensively. The spine told a story of constant riding. Vertebra showed remodeling consistent with spending most waking hours on horseback. The lower back showed degenerative changes, arthritis-like conditions, that modern physicians recognize in long-term riders. His hips showed similar modifications. These weren't the bones of someone who occasionally rode horses, but someone who lived on horseback from youth. His legs, surprisingly, showed relatively less development than his upper body. This made sense. Vaqueros didn't walk much. They rode everywhere, sometimes spending 20 or more hours daily in the saddle during cattle drives. Walking was almost an admission of failure for a true horseman. The bones bore evidence of injuries that had healed during life. The left collarbone showed an old break that had knit somewhat offset, suggesting it had healed without proper setting, probably the result of being thrown from a horse and continuing to work without medical treatment. Several ribs showed similar healed fractures. The right wrist had been broken at some point, with bone remodeling indicating it had healed while continuing to be used. Most telling were the hands. The bones showed extensive wear, particularly in the joints. The right hand's index and middle fingers showed modifications, suggesting they'd been subjected to repetitive stress, probably from constantly gripping ropes and reins. Modern rodeo cowboys show similar skeletal changes, confirming that 19th century vaqueros performed the same physically demanding work. The skull revealed facial features through forensic reconstruction techniques. The individual had a broad face with pronounced cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a nose that had been broken at least once and healed crooked. Dental analysis showed relatively good teeth for the period, though there was significant wear, suggesting a diet that included coarse foods. Notably, several teeth showed gold fillings, surprisingly sophisticated dental work for a supposedly primitive frontier setting. The cause of death became apparent through careful examination. Multiple rib fractures on the left side showed no healing, indicating they occurred at or near death. The pattern suggested blunt force trauma, probably from being kicked by a horse or cattle, or possibly from being thrown and landing hard. One rib fragment had penetrated toward where the heart and lungs would have been, likely causing fatal internal injuries. But there was more. A small entrance wound in the left shoulder blade showed bullet impact. The bone had been shattered by a round that entered from behind and above, suggesting the Vaquero had been shot while mounted, probably during a conflict. Whether this was the fatal injury, or whether he'd survived it only to die later from the rib injuries, remained uncertain. The burial circumstances suggested respect and care. Someone had taken time to prepare the body properly, dress it in finest gear, and include cherished possessions. Someone had killed a valuable horse to accompany him in death. This wasn't a quick disposal of a body, but a funeral reflecting genuine mourning and respect. Understanding Joaquín's life required reconstructing the Vaquero culture that Hollywood's cowboy mythology had largely erased. The Vaqueros weren't rough, uneducated drifters, but skilled professionals whose craft demanded years of training and whose cultural traditions were rich, complex, and deeply connected to Spanish, Moorish, and Native American influences. Vaquero training typically began in childhood. Boys as young as 7 or 8 would start learning horsemanship, not through formal lessons, but through constant exposure and practice. They learned to ride before they could fully walk steady on their own feet. By age 12, competent young vaqueros could handle horses, throw lassos, and perform basic cattle work. By 18, master craftsmen could perform feats of horsemanship and cattle handling that seemed almost magical. The relationship between vaquero and horse transcended simple utility. Horses were partners, often valued more than human companions. Vaqueros spent more time with horses than with family, sleeping near their mounts, eating in the saddle during long drives, and developing communication so subtle that commands became unnecessary. The horse anticipated the rider's intentions through slight weight shifts and unconscious cues. The daily life was harsh beyond modern imagination. Vaqueros might work 16 to 20-hour days during cattle drives, eating only twice, morning and evening, with nothing but jerky, beans, and tortillas. Water was rationed carefully in desert regions. In dire circumstances, vaqueros were known to drink cattle blood to survive when water wasn't available, a practice that shocked American settlers but made practical sense in arid lands. Housing was minimal or non-existent. During cattle work, vaqueros slept on the ground, using their saddles as pillows and horse blankets as covers. The wide-brimmed sombreros served multiple purposes: sun protection during day, rainwater collection during storms, fans to coax struggling campfires, and pillows when nothing else was available. The leather clothing that looked decorative was actually functional, thick enough to protect against thorns, snakes, and cattle horns. Medical care was primitive, and often based on folk remedies mixing Spanish, Native American, and Moorish traditions. Injuries were treated with poultices made from desert plants. Serious wounds might be cauterized with hot irons. One particularly unpleasant but reportedly effective treatment for deep puncture wounds involved packing them with horse or cattle dung. The bacteria supposedly fought infection through biological competition, essentially early antibiotic theory put into practice through traditional knowledge. Spiritual beliefs mixed Catholic Christianity with older traditions. Vaqueros carried religious medallions and crosses, but also believed in desert spirits, protective charms, and the evil eye. Before dangerous work, they might pray to Catholic saints while also performing rituals inherited from Moorish or indigenous traditions, burning specific herbs, marking horses with protective symbols, or avoiding certain behaviors thought to invite misfortune. The lasso, called la reata in Spanish, was both tool and symbol of vaqueros' skill. Master rope workers could throw loops accurately at full gallop, catch running cattle by specific legs or horns as needed, and perform tricks that became the foundation for modern rodeo events. But la reata wasn't just for cattle. It was a weapon, a climbing tool, a tent rope, and, in desperate situations, a tourniquet or restraint. Communication over distance used a sophisticated system. Vaqueros could send messages across miles using mirror flashes during day or fire signals at night. Whistle codes allowed silent coordination during cattle work. The jingling spurs weren't just decorative. The specific sound patterns identified individual vaqueros to their companions, useful in darkness or dust. Food preparation showed ingenuity born from necessity. During long drives with minimal supplies, vaqueros wrapped meat in wet leather and buried it in coals, slow cooking while they worked. They made coffee so strong it was almost undrinkable by modern standards, the caffeine essential for staying alert during night watches. Beans were soaked and cooked for hours, providing protein and calories that sustained men through exhausting days. The vaquero culture developed traditions and practices that revealed a sophisticated, multicultural heritage far more complex than the simplified cowboy mythology that later emerged. These traditions mixed Spanish colonial customs, Moorish influences from Spain's Islamic past, Native American knowledge, and innovations specific to the unique challenges of the borderlands. Burial practices reflected complex beliefs about death and the afterlife. The tradition of burying a vaquero with his horse ensured he'd have transportation in the next world, a belief with roots in various ancient cultures, from Spanish knights to Mongol warriors. The westward orientation connected to solar symbolism, the dead following the sun into the land beyond. Personal possessions buried with the body served the deceased in the afterlife, a practice showing pre-Christian influences persisting within a nominally Catholic population. The elaborate leather work wasn't purely decorative, but served as a form of identification and status communication. The specific patterns tooled into saddles, belts, and chaps identified the craftsman who made them, and often the ranch or region where the vaquero worked. Master leather workers commanded high respect and prices, and their work was treasured, maintained, and passed down through generations. Spurs served multiple purposes beyond simply urging horses forward. The distinctive sounds different spur styles made allowed vaqueros to identify each other in darkness or dust storms. The large rowels, the rotating wheels on spurs, weren't cruel as Hollywood portrayed, but were actually gentler than small rowels. The large rowels rotated easily with slight pressure, while small rowels dug in and could seriously injure horses. Skilled vaqueros barely touched their spurs to their horses. The sound alone provided sufficient communication. Hat traditions went beyond fashion. The wide brims protected from sun and rain, but also served as water collection devices in emergencies. The hat could be positioned to channel rainfall into a container or even directly into the mouth. The high crown provided insulation in heat, trapping air that protected the head from direct sun. Different hat shapes identified regional origins. Vaqueros from Sonora wore different styles than those from Jalisco or Durango. The tradition of carrying silver coins in boots wasn't superstitious, but practical. In case of death far from home, the coins paid for burial, ensuring the vaquero wouldn't be left in a shallow, unmarked grave. This also reflected a deeper anxiety. Dying alone in the wilderness was a real and constant fear. Fire circle gatherings served social, educational, and spiritual purposes. Around nighttime campfires, experienced vaqueros taught younger ones through storytelling. Tales of legendary horsemen, dangerous cattle, and supernatural encounters transmitted practical knowledge wrapped in entertaining narratives. These gatherings also featured music, simple instruments like guitars, harmonicas, and sometimes fiddles, creating the musical traditions that later became country and western music. The rodeo developed from vaquero competitions during fiestas. Ranches would gather for celebrations where vaqueros demonstrated skills, roping, bronc riding, bull riding. These weren't staged entertainments, but genuine tests of ability that carried serious respect among peers. Winners earned recognition more valuable than prize money. Mirror signaling represented sophisticated communication technology. Vaqueros could flash messages in sunlight across distances of several miles using small mirrors and a simple code. This allowed coordination of scattered riders during cattle drives and could summon help in emergencies. The technique probably derived from military signal systems used by Spanish colonial forces. Brand reading was an essential skill, requiring extensive knowledge. Brands identified cattle ownership in open-range conditions where thousands of animals from different owners mixed freely. Master vaqueros could read complex brands from considerable distances and knew the brands of every major ranch within hundreds of miles. Brand modification for cattle theft, running brands, was a serious crime that could result in hanging. Breaking wild horses required techniques developed over generations. Unlike the violent methods sometimes portrayed in films, skilled vaqueros used patient, subtle approaches based on understanding horse psychology. The best horsebreakers could train a wild Mustang to accept saddle and rider within days, through technique rather than force. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 ended the Mexican-American War and transferred vast territories, including Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming, from Mexico to the United States. This political line, drawn on maps, created catastrophic consequences for the vaqueros and Mexican ranchers who'd worked these lands for generations. Before 1848, the region operated under Spanish and Mexican land grant systems. Large ranchos, some covering hundreds of thousands of acres, were granted to families who developed them for cattle ranching. These weren't empty wilderness, but functioning economic systems. The ranchos employed hundreds of vaqueros, produced significant wealth through cattle and hide trade, and represented sophisticated land management adapted to arid conditions. The vaqueros themselves came from diverse backgrounds. Many descended from Spanish colonists, but these colonists already represented mixed heritage. The Spanish who'd settled New Spain often had Moorish ancestry from Spain's centuries under Islamic rule. Others were mestizos, mixed Spanish and Native American heritage. Some were Native Americans who'd learned vaquero skills. A few were freed African slaves, or their descendants, who'd found opportunities in frontier ranching. When American settlers began arriving in increasing numbers after 1848, they brought different legal concepts and prejudices. The American system didn't recognize the Mexican land grants the same way. Rancho owners suddenly had to prove their claims in American courts, often lacking proper documentation by American legal standards. The process was expensive, lengthy, and usually rigged against Mexican claimants. Furthermore, American settlers brought racist attitudes. The skilled vaqueros, who'd been respected professionals in Mexican society, suddenly faced discrimination as Mexicans, a term used derogatorily, regardless of whether these men had been born in territory that was now U.S. soil. Their skills were appropriated, their techniques renamed, and their historical priority erased. The term cowboy itself reflected this prejudice. Originally, boy was a diminutive and dismissive term. Calling grown men cowboys rather than the respectful vaqueros reduced their status linguistically. Yet the American settlers learned everything from the vaqueros: roping techniques, horse training, saddle design, cattle driving methods, then claimed these as their own innovations. The open range system that sustained vaquero culture faced additional threats. American farmers wanted land for agriculture, not ranching. The invention of barbed wire in the 1870s allowed cheap fencing that ended the open range. Land that had supported sustainable cattle operations for generations was divided, plowed, and fundamentally transformed. Many vaqueros found themselves displaced. Ranchos they'd worked for years were claimed by American settlers or absorbed into larger American-owned operations. The new owners often preferred hiring American cowboys, even inexperienced ones, over expert vaqueros. Discrimination in wages was common. Vaqueros might be paid half what white cowboys earned for the same work, despite superior skills. Some vaqueros adapted, working for the new system and teaching their skills to American cowboys. Others resisted, occasionally engaging in cattle rustling or banditry as forms of protest against what they viewed as theft of their homeland. A few became legendary figures, like Joaquín Murrieta, whose life became mythologized as the Mexican Robin Hood, though historical evidence of his actual deeds is mixed with later fiction. The cultural erasure was systematic. Early photographs of vaqueros were labeled simply as cowboys when reprinted. Historical accounts minimized or ignored Mexican contributions to developing the cattle industry. Hollywood westerns portrayed cattle culture as uniquely American, usually depicting Mexicans as bandits or comic relief rather than as the skilled originators of cowboy culture. Recent scholarship has worked to correct this historical injustice. Historians now recognize that essentially every technique and piece of equipment associated with American cowboys was inherited from vaqueros. The American cattle industry was built on knowledge, skills, and infrastructure created by Spanish and Mexican ranchers and their vaquero employees. The material culture of vaqueros reflected sophisticated adaptation to environmental challenges and revealed unexpected technological sophistication. While Hollywood portrayed cowboys with standardized gear, actual vaqueros used highly customized equipment, combining multiple cultural influences and generations of refinement. The saddle represented perhaps the most important piece of equipment. The Western saddle Americans now associate with cowboys was actually the Mexican vaquero saddle, derived from Spanish military saddles, which themselves showed Moorish influences. The high pommel and cantle provided security during rough riding. The saddle horn, absent from English saddles, was essential for roping, allowing the vaquero to wrap the rope around it and use the horse's strength to hold cattle. But vaquero saddles showed significant variation. Northern Mexican and Texas vaqueros used different saddle styles than those from California or Sonora. The saddles were built on wooden trees, covered with multiple layers of leather, carefully shaped and decorated. A quality saddle represented months of work and substantial investment. Vaqueros often owned their saddles, but not their horses. The saddle was more personal and valuable. The spurs varied by region and purpose. Some featured rowels 6 inches in diameter, massive compared to modern spurs. These large rowels were actually safer for horses, rotating easily with minimal pressure. The jingle bobbers, small metal pieces that created noise, served practical purposes beyond vanity. The distinctive sound allowed horses to identify their specific rider even before seeing them, creating calmer mounts when approached. Lassos came in several varieties. The riata, braided rawhide, was preferred by many because it provided better grip when wet and was easier to handle in precise work. Hemp or maguey fiber ropes worked well, but stretched when wet. Horsehair lassos, like the one buried with Joaquín, represented the ultimate craft. They were expensive, required exceptional skill to create, and lasted for years with proper care. Master rope makers could braid lassos with specific properties, some for catching cattle by horns, others for catching by legs, each requiring different stiffness and weight. The weapons carried by Vaqueros reflected pragmatic choices. The Bowie knife, despite its American name, was favored by Vaqueros, who appreciated its versatility. The large blade could skin animals, cut rope, defend against predators, and serve as a tool for countless tasks. Many Vaqueros customized their knives, adding specific grinds or shapes suited to their particular needs. Firearms represented significant investments. In the 1840s, when Joaquín was active, firearms were expensive, and many Vaqueros went unarmed. Those who owned guns cherished them and frequently customized them. The Arabic inscription on Joaquín's revolver suggested it might have been a gift or heirloom passed down through family, possibly for generations. Such weapons acquired almost talismanic significance. The clothing was entirely functional. Leather chaps, chaparreras in Spanish, protected legs from thorns, brush, and cattle horns. They were split up the sides for easy mounting and dismounting. The vest provided pockets for carrying small items while keeping the core warm without restricting arm movement. The bandana served multiple purposes: filtering dust, providing padding under hat bands, washing cloth, and emergency bandage. Boots were perhaps more important than commonly recognized. The high heels weren't fashion, but function. They prevented the foot from sliding through the stirrup, which could cause a rider to be dragged to death if thrown from the horse. The pointed toes allowed easier insertion into stirrups. The high shafts protected lower legs. Quality boots were expensive and carefully maintained, often lasting years. Tobacco played an important role in Vaquero culture. Not just for recreation, tobacco leaves were believed to have medicinal properties. Tobacco juice was applied to insect bites and stings. In extreme situations, tobacco could be chewed as a mild stimulant during exhausting work. The ritualized cigarette rolling provided a moment of calm during stressful days. The development of barbed wire in the 1870s marked the beginning of the end for open-range vaquero culture. This simple technology, twisted wire with sharp barbs, made fencing economically feasible for the first time. Previously, fencing vast ranges was prohibitively expensive. Barbed wire allowed farmers to protect crops and ranchers to control specific pastures. The free-ranging herds and the vaqueros who managed them became obsolete almost overnight. While popular mythology dominated public perception of the Old West, care historical research revealed the documented reality of vaquero life that differed dramatically from Hollywood's simplifications. These records, photographs, census documents, business ledgers, and personal accounts, provided evidence of the complex, multicultural reality that shaped the American West. The earliest photographs of the American West, taken in the 1850s and 1860s, showed the reality. These images captured vaqueros and cowboys of diverse ethnic backgrounds. But when these photos were later published in books and magazines, they were often cropped, edited, or selectively chosen to emphasize white cowboys, while minimizing or excluding evidence of Mexican, Black, Native American, and Asian presence. Census records told clearer stories. Texas census data from 1850 through 1880 showed that cattle work employed men of all backgrounds. In some counties near the border, more than half the men listed as stockmen or cowboys had Spanish surnames. Black cowboys, many former slaves who'd found freedom and opportunity in the cattle industry, appeared regularly in census records, contradicting their near absence from popular histories. Ranch ledgers and financial records provided economic data. The legendary cattle drives, moving herds from Texas to Kansas railheads, were major financial operations. Records showed that Mexican vaqueros and American cowboys often worked side by side, though wage discrimination was common. Vaqueros typically earned $20 to $25 per month, while American cowboys earned $30 to $40 for the same work. Court records documented conflicts. Property disputes between Mexican rancho owners and American settlers filled frontier courts. The legal proceedings showed systematic bias. Mexican land claims were often rejected on technical grounds, while American claims, with equally questionable documentation, were accepted. Violence erupted regularly, with vaqueros sometimes forming armed resistance against what they viewed as theft of their lands. Newspaper accounts from the period revealed contemporary attitudes. While some papers portrayed vaqueros as skilled professionals worthy of respect, others described them with racial slurs and stereotypes. The coverage reflected the tensions of a region undergoing rapid demographic and cultural transformation. Military records provided unexpected information. During the Mexican-American War and later conflicts, both sides employed mounted scouts and cavalry who used vaquero techniques. The U.S. Army's cavalry tactics were significantly influenced by Mexican military traditions, which themselves derived from Spanish military practice. Trade records documented the economic importance of the cattle industry. Hides and tallow were California's primary exports before the gold rush. The infrastructure, knowledge, and workforce that made this trade possible were overwhelmingly Mexican, challenging narratives that portrayed the region as empty wilderness before American settlement. Ship manifests and immigration records showed the diversity of people drawn to the West. Chinese immigrants became cowboys, as did Europeans of various nationalities. The West attracted people seeking opportunities unavailable in more established regions, including African Americans fleeing the post-Reconstruction South and Mexican families seeking better economic prospects. Linguistic evidence revealed the depth of Spanish influence. Countless English words used in ranching derive from Spanish. Lasso from lasso, rodeo, ranch from rancho, stampede from estampida, bronco, corral, lariat, chaps from chaparreras, and dozens more. The vocabulary of American cattle culture was largely borrowed wholesale from Vaquero Spanish. Archaeological sites provided physical evidence. Excavations at old rancho sites revealed the material culture of Vaquero life: distinctive pottery, leatherworking tools, specific architectural styles, and burial patterns. These sites confirmed that Vaquero culture had deep roots and sophisticated traditions predating American settlement. Ghost towns, abandoned settlements from mining or ranching booms, preserved architectural evidence. Many showed Mexican building styles, proving Mexican presence and influence even in regions where later narratives minimized it. The adobe construction, plaza layouts, and specific building techniques all reflected Mexican cultural practices. The folklore and supernatural beliefs of vaqueros revealed a worldview blending Catholic Christianity, indigenous spirituality, and Moorish influences from Spain's Islamic past. These stories served practical purposes, transmitting cultural values, warning of dangers, and providing explanations for phenomena people didn't scientifically understand. The legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman, was known to virtually every vaquero. The story varied regionally, but typically described a ghostly woman mourning lost children, her cries echoing across plains and canyons at night. Pragmatically, the legend warned against specific dangers, certain areas known for flash floods, dangerous wildlife, or treacherous terrain, by attributing supernatural danger to them. Children raised to fear La Llorona learned to avoid real hazards. Stories of headless horsemen predated Washington Irving's famous tale. Spanish and Mexican traditions included spectral riders on ghostly horses, often described as warnings of impending disaster or punishment for sins. Vaqueros claimed to have encountered these apparitions, particularly near sites where violent deaths had occurred. Whether these represented genuine supernatural experiences or misidentified natural phenomena filtered through cultural expectations remains debatable. St. Elmo's fire, electrical discharge that creates glowing effects during thunderstorms, terrified cattle and could cause stampedes. Vaqueros developed specific rituals for protecting herds during storms, including strategic positioning of riders and specific actions believed to ward off the mysterious spirit fire. While the rituals may not have affected the electrical phenomena, they probably helped keep Vaqueros calm and organized during dangerous situations. Wild horse herds supposedly contained ghostly leader stallions that could never be caught. These legends probably reflected real encounters with particularly clever or elusive horses that repeatedly escaped capture. But the supernatural explanations served to save face for Vaqueros, whose skills failed to catch them. The stories also warned about the dangers of obsessive pursuit. Vaqueros who chased ghost horses too far from camp might die from thirst or exposure. Cave systems in the borderlands held special significance. Some caves showed ancient pictographs, predating Vaquero culture by thousands of years. But Vaqueros added their own marks: dates, names, brands, religious symbols. These caves served as message centers, shelters during storms, and landmarks. They also featured in supernatural stories, with some supposedly containing treasures guarded by spirits. Treasure legends were ubiquitous. Stories of lost Spanish gold mines, buried mission wealth, or bandit hordes proliferated. While most were purely mythical, they reflected genuine historical events. Spanish colonial mining operations did exist. Missions did accumulate wealth that sometimes disappeared during conflicts, and outlaws did occasionally bury stolen money. The legends kept alive memories of historical complexity, while probably leading countless people on futile treasure hunts. Animal behavior portents were taken seriously. Cattle acting unusually before earthquakes or major storms, horses refusing to enter certain areas, or birds exhibiting strange patterns were interpreted as warnings. Some of these probably reflected animals detecting environmental changes humans couldn't sense: infrasound from approaching storms, changes in magnetic fields before earthquakes, or dangerous gas concentrations in certain locations. The practice of using amulets and protective charms mixed Catholic and pre-Christian traditions. Medals of saints, crosses blessed by priests, and prayers in Latin combined with mezuzahs, possibly from crypto-Jewish families, special stones, and ritually prepared herbs. These items provided psychological comfort, but also represented cultural continuity, maintaining traditions that reached back through Spain to medieval Moorish and even earlier influences. The supernatural reputation of certain vaqueros added to folklore. Men with exceptional skills were sometimes attributed magical abilities. A vaquero who could calm wild horses through soft talk was said to use magic spells. One who consistently survived dangerous situations carried powerful amulets. A rope thrower of legendary accuracy supposedly had a lasso blessed by a witch. These attributions transformed real skill into mythical power, creating folk heroes. DNA analysis conducted on Joaquín's remains in 2019 provided scientific confirmation of the complex ethnic heritage that Vaquero culture represented. The analysis, performed using both mitochondrial and nuclear DNA, revealed a genetic story more fascinating than any Hollywood Western. The Y chromosome analysis traced Joaquín's paternal lineage to the Iberian Peninsula, specifically genetic markers common in southern Spain and North Africa. This suggested descent from the Moors, Muslims from North Africa, who ruled much of Spain from the 8th to 15th centuries. When Christian reconquest expelled or forcibly converted Muslims and Jews, many became conversos, converting to Christianity but maintaining hidden cultural practices. These conversos were among those who settled New Spain. Mitochondrial DNA, inherited through the maternal line, showed Native American markers, specifically haplogroups common among indigenous peoples of northern Mexico. This confirmed Joaquín was mestizo, of mixed European and indigenous heritage, like most Mexican vaqueros. Autosomal DNA revealed additional complexity. Genetic markers indicated some sub-Saharan African ancestry, possibly from African slaves or freed blacks who'd intermarried with Mexican families. A small percentage of East Asian DNA suggested possible Filipino ancestry. Filipinos were part of Spanish colonial trade networks, and some settled in Mexico. The genetic evidence also revealed health information. Joaquín carried markers associated with lactose tolerance, an adaptation found in populations with long histories of dairy consumption. This made sense for someone from a cattle culture. He also carried genetic variants affecting pain sensitivity and inflammation response, possibly explaining how he continued working despite numerous injuries. Most remarkably, analysis of bacterial DNA from his teeth revealed Brucella bacteria, indicating he'd contracted brucellosis, a disease transmitted from cattle that causes chronic fatigue, joint pain, and fever. This occupational disease demonstrated the costs of close proximity to livestock. In the autumn of 2020, Joaquín was reburied near where he was found, in a ceremony honoring both his individual life and the broader Vaquero culture that history had marginalized. Descendants of old rancho families, modern cowboys of all backgrounds, historians, and local residents gathered to acknowledge a man who represented thousands whose stories were never told. The ceremony included elements from multiple traditions: Catholic prayers in Spanish, traditional Vaquero songs accompanied by guitars, and indigenous blessings recognized the multicultural heritage Joaquín embodied. A rider led a riderless horse through the crowd, the traditional military honor adapted to civilian cowboy tradition. The gravestone reads, Joaquín, Vaquero, 1803 to 1848. Master of horses, herder of cattle, keeper of traditions. The first cowboy. The date marks him as dying the very year the border moved, making him symbolically the last Mexican vaquero and the first American cowboy, though such distinctions would have meant nothing to him. Modern rodeo culture maintains vaquero traditions, though often without recognizing their origins. The techniques, equipment, and competitive events all derive directly from vaquero practices. Recent efforts to acknowledge this debt have seen increased participation by Mexican and Mexican-American cowboys, reclaiming their rightful place in a tradition their ancestors created. The story teaches that history is more complex, more diverse, and more interesting than simplified myths suggest. The American West wasn't tamed by one type of person, but by people of many backgrounds working together, competing, intermarrying, and creating something new. Joaquín rode into the sunset not alone, but as part of a diverse stream of humanity that made the West what it became. His trail continues wherever people value truth over comfortable fiction.